Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Hello, everyone.
Hello,
morning.
gentlemen.
I don't know if I woke up early this morning or, a little bit. There's a spring in my step. I don't know. There's just things going on. I just feel a bit more punchy today than normal. So we were already teasing Seth before the podcast already. So it's going to be a fun day. I think
Yes.
we're gonna have some words.
I'm personally pumped about this conversation today, but we'll get to that.
Tommy loves lakes. He likes swimming in them. He likes boating in them, fishing in them.
Ever since I went to Wisconsin for the summer vacation,
Wisconsin.
how fun lakes are.
Wisconsin.
Is that not is that not how you say it?
Well, it's close. There's no E in the beginning of it, but that's okay. Wisconsin. Wisconsin.
I'm gonna blame.
I told you I'm punchy.
New York accent on that.
You better be on point today. I'm gonna get you.
Who axed you?
Who axed you? Oh goodness. So let's go through some openers here. There's a lot of articles that have appeared recently. I think there's some things we definitely want to talk about. We've kind of been doing a lot of things in general. We've just been very busy. So having some more live sessions here recently, we're kind of getting back into the swing of things. One thing I'm not going to say I'm nervous about this, but I definitely want everyone to be aware. This is the same level, alert. This is the same type of alerting that was that we were kind of giving out when we were talking about Fabric being introduced, because there was some weird settings in the admin portal that were by default off, but will be turned on at a certain point in time. So be aware, there is a post from the Microsoft team. The post is literally titled, "Heads up, Power BI OneDrive and SharePoint report viewing will be on by default starting in October." So let's quickly talk about the feature, and then we'll talk about you need to be paying attention to this, and you need to have a policy, or you need to figure this out for your organization. Do you want this on or do you not? So the feature is, I think, if I understand this correctly, go to SharePoint without going to PowerBI.com, be able to view a Power BI report inside SharePoint. You can go to a report, click on the report file, just the way you would view it. You go to a SharePoint right now with Excel. You can click on the Excel document. The Excel document opens up in the browser, and you're now reading or viewing that Excel sheet. I think this is the same thing. You're going to be able to see the report. Now, I don't know if it's see or edit the report, but you're going to see the report in the browser inside SharePoint. Thoughts, gentlemen?
So the feature is cool, and it's just really viewing the desktop file, but in the consumable appearance in the UI. And any report that's available in OneDrive or SharePoint can be kind of neat. It's actually not a terrible experience, but it's probably something you really want to plan out from an organization point of view.
Yes.
It's definitely something you don't want just to turn on by default.
Let me give you what I think will happen, right? This is what I think will happen.
Please.
I think what will happen, and this is what I don't understand yet, I've got to figure it out, but if you want to track what's being done in Power BI, if you want to track who's opening what reports, if you want to track what's being used or not being used from your Power BI ecosystem, you would probably not want to turn this on. You would probably want to leave this feature off and not let people view files from SharePoint. Yes, they can store them there. That's totally fine. Just make them files and push the teams to push these files into PowerBI.com and do proper sharing, right? My suspicion that's going to happen here is everyone's going to be like, oh, this is amazing. I don't even need PowerBI.com now. And so now people will just show up, even though they have a pro license, they'll put reports together in a SharePoint location, and the team will work or use the reports from the SharePoint location. Again, it will happen. It's not a question of if. It will happen, and people will not publish to PowerBI.com anymore. And there's going to be this whole other, workflow around how do we manage the loading of these Excel files into my Power BI file from SharePoint and all this other kind of I think you're going to get a lot more questions here in the near future.
There are certain use cases that I just don't understand, and hey, it takes somebody to explain them to me, and I can't wait for somebody to do that for me for this feature, right? I can understand, I can hear a lot of users who are not familiar with or use Power BI normally requesting this feature. I want to see these reports if this is the PBIX file, I want to see it, and that's not the point of the PBIX file, right? Like we've gone through years of refining the experience of how you share content with consumers. I think this is going to confuse people because if you start sharing these files around, you're not refreshing them. This isn't live data. This isn't automated in any way. Like why would we start taking the files themselves as the sharing mechanism? I just don't I don't get it.
Yes.
Like it's already confusing people. Like I can consume in an app, I can consume in Teams, I can embed in SharePoint. Why am I embedding in SharePoint if I can read the file in SharePoint? Like all of this is disconnected. And what initially this seems like to me is a whole bunch of people who use Power BI wrong, telling Microsoft they need this feature.
Yep.
Unless there's, and like I said, I'm not the brightest bulb in the box all the time. I don't know everything. I could be completely wrong, and there's a great use case. We've spent so much time curating this that this one just seems to not make sense to me.
Yeah, we even spent an episode here, and I've been trying to argue with myself on the use cases.
How's that going?
Not well. So not well.
Did you win?
I haven't.
Did you win the argument? Is the question here.
I never win those arguments. So, well, the one use case, like, well, maybe it's a review process for the BI team if it's in SharePoint. It's like, well, no, because I would want to look at the DAX and I would want to look at the model. Okay, well, maybe rather than that, it's a process to go through before you actually publish it to an app. It's like, well, no, that's what a member a member role is, where they can publish to a workspace, but it's not in the app yet. So there, to your point, Seth, yeah, there was someone who said devote time to this, but from any workflow or process, it's a neat feature, but not much else. And Mike, it just kind of leads to more confusion than enlightenment.
So, I will say this: there will be value brought from this feature. It will be helpful to go to a SharePoint page and be able to kind of just look at each of the files. What I would prefer, if this were my feature, I would prefer a static image of what that report looks like when it was there. I don't want to interact with it. I just need to see what it is so I can know which report I'm trying to open and edit, and then move forward with that. So all this to say is, it's going to be an interesting feature. I will say this: if this were my tenant, if this were my team, I would turn this off by default, and I would only roll it out slowly after I had some substantial test time with this feature, making sure that I had a fair understanding of how this would impact my environment. And I would talk with my leaders in my center of excellence and say, do we really want people using Power BI assets outside of powerbi.com and for sharing things? You can totally do that today. You can totally have Power BI files. You can push them up to SharePoint. Everyone could download them from a team and put them on their desktop and use Power BI Desktop to build stuff. I totally understand that, but I think it's defeating the purpose of the enterprise solution around Power BI in general. And I would want to educate and or train my teams to be more equipped to be comfortable inside apps and powerbi.com to actually use the content. So
it's more of the synergy of PowerPoint and Power BI.
Oh, shut up. I hate that. I'm not even, no. Tommy.
My favorite thing in the world.
Synergy.
It's not PowerPoint for data. It is data for data.
I'm going to reach out to Lauren on this to get Lauren's the author of the blog post. We got to, I've got to understand.
I got questions.
I've got questions.
Let's shift gears a little bit more. A couple more items here I want to go through as we have an intro here. One thing I will point out here, Microsoft has just released the Microsoft Fabric Readiness Git repo. So I'll put that in the link here as well. So there's a Fabric Readiness repo that has been produced by the Fabric team. And this is a really good repository. There's about 7 presentations, and it's talking about the whole purpose is a collection of presentation decks that are for user groups, online presentations, in-person conferences, and customer conversations. So this is like the sales deck that you're going to use or go through and understand what are the talking points that Microsoft is using when it comes to Fabric. I think this is a pretty strong solution here. I think a lot of people are still asking, particularly me, I have tons of questions. What is Fabric? How does it work? What are the different people that need to be involved with what Fabric is doing? So I think this is a great way of reading through these materials, understanding what's going on inside these presentations that Microsoft is articulating.
Good
Things
one.
like
A good one.
using data science in Fabric, using data engineering in Fabric. How do you use real-time analytics in Fabric? What does data integration look like with Data Factory inside Fabric? Just in basic information around Fabric for Power BI users. What I'm finding is Fabric is bringing, again, this is what I said in the past, Fabric is bringing very much the data engineering world into the business user arena. So I think from a business user, we're getting a lot more capability, a lot more enterprise pieces with Fabric. And
Right. I think when we talk about these things, like the way you're describing them, we should say wrapped in Fabric.
wrapped in Fabric.
Data science wrapped in Fabric.
Power BI,
Right?
data science
Right?
wrapped in
Let's
Fabric.
take it to the next level of
Analogies. I like it. That's
Yeah.
good.
Great.
Yes. Good. Wrapped.
Fine. So
Mine's good.
This is
So
what
I've-
I'm contributing.
Yes, exactly. One minor thing here I would also like to point out as well, as far as updates, there's been a good number of updates. I think this one will be helpful to people. I just want to point it out. The Microsoft team has now, actually Rui's on fire. Whatever Rui's building at Microsoft, I love all his things that he's producing.
Yeah.
He's
Right.
doing the PBIP format. He's now dataset refresh history enhancements, his blog about that one. Rui's just killing it. So Rui, keep doing what you're doing. Microsoft, pay Rui double and have him do more. He's just doing such a good job. So he's amazing.
not a sponsor.
Not a sponsor.
Fans.
There's the automatic refresh tracking has now been improved inside the service. So you're going to be able to see when you refresh a data set, by default, the data set will retry itself multiple times. So you've run into these occasions where I'm trying to load some data. It's taken 2 hours, and then finally the data pipe fails. Well, you don't know what happened in those 2 hours. What was occurring during that period of time? So now there's more details, and there is it's telling you about the automatic tracking of refreshes. It's giving you when it started and when it stopped. It's giving you a status on each of those refreshes. It's telling you what type of refresh was occurring, like a data or query cache. So there's a lot of really interesting new features coming out of this. It tells you more about the duration of information. So I really like this new data refresh enhancement. I think this is going to be helpful for debugging.
No, 100%.
Well, yeah.
Like if you guys have spent any time in triaging refresh issues, you know. So this is great because it consolidates probably like depending hundreds of rows of just log file stuff you could get at in the execution logs within like the gateway. But if you don't have one, you didn't have any access to
Yeah.
this, right? So this is really nice just because across the board now you have a little bit more insight in the retry attempts and like where things are happening if something's delayed, which is buried now in a one-time thing, right? Like for instance, if something completed and it took an hour longer, I think this breaks out the detail where potentially you could have had a couple failures first, right? While it was trying and retrying, but it didn't kill the initial connection, but it showed that it took a lot longer.
Yeah.
As opposed to just succeeding, right? Because there's a lot of questions in here that once in a while you're just like, why did it take, this long compared to like these other attempts?
And what's
data
error
source
code
or something else?
X0000?
Well,
So, well, and one thing I love here, one thing I'm hoping. One, I love that this is actually going to be part of like the REST API. So this is actually information. They're not just bringing this into the UI. This is actually going to be incorporated, which is huge to be able to see the refresh history and store that. The one thing I'm really hoping here is they also store this or somehow store this in data flows, because I believe this is just for data sets. So, and they're getting better with the data flow refresh history, especially with Gen 2. But I mean, all this information is so integral to say, okay, what should I optimize? But two, what's going to be causing this problem? There's nothing worse than waiting 10 minutes for 15 minutes to see something refresh, just to see that error at the end without any real good clue on what's causing this. So one thing I'm hoping is that this is part of data flows. One thing I love, it's going to be part of the REST API.
I would agree. I think it's going to be really good here. So anyways, they're definitely getting better about messaging back to the users. I think they're improving the right areas. There's definitely a lot more things that are also coming out. There's the The Fabric blog has other things as well. So those are the kind of the key things we get to and talk about. So with that, we're done with introductions. There's a lot of moving parts today these days. Let's get into our main topic today. Tommy, frame us out here. So we're talking about loading data. How much data? What is OneLake? Let's talk more about that. Frame us out the conversation for today, Tommy.
Absolutely, gentlemen. Now being 250 episodes in, by the way, congratulations for that. And also Microsoft Fabric now being around since May, I think it has come to a point of conversation and understanding, well, how much data actually should exist in a OneLake. We've talked a lot about this, and a lot of our training too has been on the framework of it's a data set, but should it be more? Should it be treated as multiple data sets? How much information, how much tables, how much artifacts should actually exist in a OneLake? How many data sets should a OneLake support? Can we make that decision yet based on the information that we know? And has our perception changed?
Yeah, this is a great question. I like where this is going. I still feel that Microsoft has mislabeled what OneLake is versus lake houses. I still kind of disagree with their language here. And when I think about or overlay what I understand about like other systems, Snowflake, Databricks, other systems that are building this kind of lake house like architecture, I think of OneLake as the lake house. It is the lake house. And then the lake houses are the equivalent of like a database that would live like on a SQL server. So a SQL server is a machine. It would host many different SQL databases. Each database is a collection of tables. And so if I relate, what people know about SQL and how SQL servers have been developed in the past, right? The OneLake is kind of like all servers in my company. The server is acting like almost like the OneLake object, and then all the databases are collections of tables. Those collections of tables are the equivalent of a lake house in PowerBI.com. So I think Microsoft changed the language on what these things mean, because when you start talking about the security of everything inside OneLake, I don't think we have a full picture as to how this will be impactful or how good this will be until we get to more security or governance around what data is being produced across the organization within the OneLake ecosystem.
What makes you equate one lake houses with OneLake? Like, because I can have multiple lake houses in OneLake.
Yeah, I mean, if I think about the structure of like a lake house, I mean, here the reasoning behind this is from what I gather, the OneLake experience is a collection of storage accounts that are just housing information, right? If you need to localize some information into OneLake in your region or your country, you can do that. And that data can be stored inside a particular region. You can access it, you can read it. So if you think of the OneLake experience as a service of a collection of storage accounts that all house tables, in my mind, yes, that's a little bit broader of a definition than what I would say I use in like Databricks today. But in Databricks today, I build a single blob storage. It has almost infinite storage space in there, and I just make collections, and each collection is, where I can put my files or tables or whatever I need. So I don't like to, when I build things for companies, we're not building a series of storage accounts. We're just kind of putting everything in a single storage account, which is a lake house for a company. So I think of the OneLake as this idea of all data that the company owns. Everything that's being stored in the cloud is living in that one area.
Yeah, but that's a different, like, and that's why I guess I have the questions I do around your statement saying like you think they mislabeled it or lake house, because the descriptions they have is there's one lake. Right? There's one lake for the organization, and I think the pitch is it's OneDrive for data, right?
Yes, correct.
Like
I kind of like that. That's a good analogy.
And even the experience of it, right, feels very much like OneDrive, and it
Yes.
reduces all of this same setup. And like Josh Kaplan did a video with
Really good video.
Cube, right? Where if you think about how we had to manually set up network drives to like do sharing of files before OneDrive, right? It's a big pain in the butt.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing like it's very, that concept of what we're doing now with cloud sources and OneLake being the central location to remove all of what are now multiple storage containers within an organization. They all serve different purposes. OneLake is just the storage, right? So to equate that with the lake house or the one part that you're building in analytics, I guess doesn't make sense, because you could have multiple lake houses. We can have multiple artifacts. It's the storage engine for all of the data within the organization.
Yes.
Not necessarily like the artifacts that we start to build within OneLake that can sit in OneLake, that we can interact with, these delta tables, etc.
I guess maybe I'm relating more to this concept of, it's not necessarily the technology or where the files or the number of storage accounts that are associated. I guess I think of, when I think of lake houses, when I would talk to or communicate to a client or talking to someone, I would communicate, you have one lake house. I would not communicate to a client, you would need to have multiple lake houses. You for certain could have multiple storage accounts that are serving and storing things in there. But
Sure.
I think they got the messaging right. I just think the name in my terminology, or like where my frame of reference is coming from.
Sure. I guess my point though is there may be one lake house. You may create a universal place where you have all of the data for an organization.
Totally.
But that's all that would be in there, is curated information that belongs in the lake house. The OneLake contains much more than that. Right?
I think I would agree
with holistic container for everything within the organization. Like think about it this way. How many organizations do you know of right now, even in analytics, their production, etc.? How many lakes do they have stood up?
In what?
How many ADLS Gen 2 storage lakes do they have set up?
But this is where this is where I'm saying this is where I disagree with the terminology a little bit. I think if you think about the lake house, like ADLS Gen 2, that's the technology piece, and that's fine. You could have 10, 15 of those stood up, one for dev, one for test, one for product. That's fine. But when I think about lake house architectures, I think I'm communicating the lake house architecture, or at least how I understand it, is more of a conceptual piece. That is, the lake house is the equivalent to a OneLake. It's the sum of all data that's being produced anywhere in cloud, and what OneLake is providing is a management layer to actually say who has access to what pieces of data across what storage accounts.
Let's think about this in the realm of Microsoft Fabric too, because remember, anytime you create a lakehouse in Microsoft Fabric, you're also getting the SQL warehouse. You're getting the SQL endpoint, and
this is my point.
Are interconnected.
But this is my point.
So it's not just storage.
You're right. But my point is, the lakehouse, as Microsoft called it inside Fabric, is the word lakehouse. It is a single object that has tables and files. I'm saying my definition of lakehouse is broader than that. My definition of lakehouse would be equivalent to what Microsoft is calling OneLake. That's what I would communicate to a client or something like that.
So let's have the conversation
it's just confusing.
In the realm of Microsoft Fabric, where every lakehouse is binded to a warehouse, binded to a SQL endpoint that can have a data set to it, compared to just being storage. And I think, this is part of the confusion too.
But it's not
bound. It's not bound.
Anytime you create a lakehouse, you get a SQL endpoint.
You get default.
You get a modeling. Yeah.
You by default. So this is where this. But let me step back then, because lake houses is what you described, Tommy. Because exactly. So what it is, Microsoft's lakehouse is a bound asset of storage and compute, all bundled together. And when you create, quote unquote, the lakehouse, which would basically be a container for tables and files, it's basically what that means for the storage component. With that, you by default get this SQL serverless machine that goes right along with that, and Microsoft automatically builds a schema for you that is the lakehouse, or the data set, or sorry, what's the other one called? It's called the warehouse.
The warehouse.
You get a lakehouse. It's basically this. You get the storage account, the storage, and you get to compute automatically. The compute comes in the form of two objects: the warehouse and the data set. Those are automatically produced for you when you create the storage account. So to me, I get it, and it makes a lot of sense. And it really is borrowing the language of lake houses to the organization. I'm just saying Microsoft had to change the language here because it is this picture of the world is now much larger.
Yes, and to add another fun layer of complexity here, if you're even dreaming of doing direct lake, you need a lake house. If you want to have that refresh capability, you need to be using lake houses.
Correct. Because that's the combined asset of storage and compute into one artifact.
Okay. So where I can understand your point of view, if I'm thinking holistically,
yeah,
the foundations for which I can store data for the organization, any type of data, for all users, is OneLake. It is the OneDrive for my organization.
Yep. It's everything. It's refined data. It's raw data.
If you're
it's unclean
saying
data. Yep.
Right. If you're saying that the experiences, some of the experiences in Fabric interact with or build tables of information, which we know are Delta Parquet, right? Like that's the storage within OneLake. It doesn't change the fact that the structure of all of this file storage is OneLake. It doesn't change the fact that when we build artifacts, however we engage with them, it's still Delta Parquet.
Yes.
What you're describing to me is the interaction by which Fabric allows you to interact and create those files, but it's still just the Delta Parquet file. You can still interact with that file on that framework called OneDrive, or like OneLake,
yes, correct,
with other tools as well. So you're describing your interactions of like Fabric as being the thing that is Lakehouse, OneLake kind of thing. And I don't agree with that. I think these are different things. This is the structure by which these artifacts are being built. And the permissioning across this isn't relegated to just what you're interacting with. It's across those objects based on what a person would have permissions to.
So perhaps let me frame the problem having where this really the agenda came from, and maybe that will help frame a little here.
Well, hang on before we go on, Tommy. Let's get to that one. But I agree with you, Seth. But I also say I think my fundamental understanding of what a lakehouse came from was from Databricks, and so this is probably most of where my heartburn comes from. Databricks already started this language of a lakehouse, and a lakehouse from a Databricks perspective was all encompassing. All storage things, all compute things, everything in Parquet, all of the artifacts in your entire organization lives in this thing called a machine, basically a combined storage and compute layer called the Lakehouse. So my fundamental understanding of like where I come from is a organizational concept phase. And so what I'm looking at now is I'm trying to take what I know of a Lakehouse and overlay it into the language of what Power BI is doing with Fabric, which again, Microsoft wants to be unique and a special snowflake here and design their own language around. So now they're going to have a OneLake. What was that?
They aren't. You're still what you would construct as a lakehouse within Databricks is a curation of ETL patterns of building out tables, structured lakehouse type data for the organization. It's the same thing in Fabric. OneLake just extends and says, you don't have to have multiple different storage locations. Just throw all your crap out into OneLake, and everybody who has access to it has access to it, just like we do with OneDrive. File sharing, share access, throw your PBX files out there. Who cares?
And I'm saying what you just described in the latter half of that is a lakehouse.
No, it's not.
Yes,
it's not the same thing as Databricks. Where are your PBX files in Databricks?
That's not part of the lakehouse. Lakehouse is purely storage and compute.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah. We're saying the same thing. We're just saying the same thing. I'm just saying this is you're pushing on the points that I say is confusing. Microsoft has added confusion here because what Microsoft has built or is building is Lakehouse. The whole thing. One lake, one security, all the things in Fabric. That to me is the Lakehouse architecture. That's what you want.
Yeah, I don't agree with your naming, but let's move on.
Okay. Come back.
We're going to agree to disagree.
So let me share my problems. No.
Moving on.
Well, here's the fundamental thing that I think this real topic or this question arose from. Every demo, every training, every slide, the user stories, documentation, all revolves around the Lakehouse to the SQL endpoint to a Power BI data set. The problem I'm having with this right now, or struggling with, is it's being a single Lakehouse to a single data set. I have not seen one demo or one iota of examples of one Fabric Lakehouse supporting 25 different tables to support 10 different data sets. That has not been a use case. Mike, you and I know this too from our demos. One Lakehouse so far for one data set is supporting a lot of artifacts. So I don't know right now. I'm sure it can handle it, but is that the intended use case? How much data for the Power BI reporting for that final endpoint? And that's the fundamental difference here I see with Fabric Lakehouses. It's the intended end use case here. It's not, yes, you can use it for storage, you can use it for those other purposes, but the intended endpoint, the intended end result for the Lakehouse and putting data in there and putting tables in there is for a Power BI data set or a Power BI model.
Not anymore with Fabric. I'm going to disagree with you here too. I'm on fire. I'm going to be
that either.
So fine, but show me a demo or even Microsoft showing a difference.
They have it. They do data science on top. So their whole idea. So this is their entire
all within Fabric.
So yes,
Sure,
the idea is what they've done, in my opinion, here is they've taken Synapse and Data Factory and shoved it into Power BI. What happened
all of these are the same services we have.
All these the same
consolidated together.
So what has happened is Microsoft said, "Whoops, Synapse didn't do well, or we're not getting the right amount of usage in that." What we needed to do is bring those things closer to where Power BI is, because Power BI is the shining star in all of this, right? When Power BI came out, I mean, Seth and I were talking about it like a long time ago. We were like, anything that touches Power BI becomes shiny. And if you think about, even when I talk about topics around Power BI and Fabric, everyone loves seeing visuals and reports. It's so graphically in your face. If you can make something that ties to a report, people love that and gravitate towards that as a topic. As soon as you talk about data engineering, tables, lake houses, people are like, meh, not my thing. Someone else is going to take it. So the audience is like, when you engage people on visuals and report design, I think people are very excited about it. This whole other mundane area around like data engineering and stuff, not as exciting. It's not as flashy. So you're now bringing all this. And so what Microsoft, I believe, is trying to do now is say, okay, you can use a lot of these Lakehouse artifacts directly with Power BI. That is one goal. But they've added this whole new data engineering role. They've added this new data science role into this space.
Yes.
And they really want you to build models. And I think there's going to be, now with notebooks and things, you now have a whole new workload of building training models, training things, pushing those things out to Azure ML or Azure ML Studio, and trying to get a model up and running in production that can predict things in real time. It's trying to be the everything system for all of that.
I get it, but that still goes to this fundamental question. How much data then should exist in a Lakehouse, if even to the point of how many tables should be in a Lakehouse? Should it support a single data set? Should it support 20 data sets and the data engineering and the data science side of it? How much storage are we looking at what a single Lakehouse in Microsoft Fabric should provide?
So I'm going to answer this question in a bad way, and I'm pretty sure you're going to have the OneLake should contain everything.
Okay.
If you're loading data from a data flow and you're building like a raw form of that table, you're just trying to industry load it in, fine. That should be there. If you're trying to load things from Excel files, great. Put those files in OneLake. So
yeah,
I think the design of OneLake is bring all the information, files and or groomed tables of data, bring everything you need to the OneLake experience. Now, I'm going to say OneLake. And in my prior knowledge, I would say OneLake/Lakehouse. Now, This is where I think Microsoft changes the terms here. The Lakehouse in terms of Fabric is, to your point, Tommy, a specific bucket. Imagine my Lakehouse has a house with many rooms. The Lakehouse Microsoft describes as a room in the entire Lakehouse.
I'm with you. So I am.
So to this point, right now, the question becomes, okay, I've gotten a lot of data loaded to my, again, maybe a better analogy, like let's think of our OneLake as a skyscraper, right? The skyscraper has many rooms, different offices, different functions, different teams. You even sell different rooms to different companies, right? So you have HR and finance and sales. So that is the building. So everything that is being data driven gets stuck into the building. Now, what needs to be in room on
How big
floor
is that room?
23 and what is in it? How do we decorate it? Right. So
Yes, I'm with
this is the question, I think. And this is, I think, where I'm struggling right now is to try and figure out, okay, what is the level of effort or what do we pull into this one? And do I need, a pipeline of lake houses? And this is what really bothers me now, because when I think about this, I have to maybe I have a bronze lake house, a silver lake house, and a gold lake house. And depending on what users I want to access that room, if it's gold, it's groomed, it's ready to go. I now have 3 lake houses, potentially with different quality of data in each of those spaces. And now the sharing mechanism for each of those things are now different. But to your point, Tommy, I get a compute layer, I get a warehouse, and I get a data set for all 3 of those spaces. Maybe I need that, maybe I don't.
Why would I need 3 different lake houses? Can I just manage permissions on a layer?
Today you cannot. So you can't manage permissions down to the table or row level detail in a lakehouse today.
Eventually, we should be able to.
Hopefully, with one security, that's what I'm reading into that a little bit.
Well, I would say then that's a precursor for any engagement here, is that level of.
I would agree, and I would say I probably wouldn't. And
because
if
because that would solve this problem.
Yes,
right. Like I would argue that.
Which problem?
What you're discussing is like this explosion, right?
Yes.
I would argue you'd have one lake house. You'd have your raw, current, and curated layers, or gold, whatever you want to call them, are going to branch out into different business units for different things, right? You can start to segment things out or have different areas own different parts of that lake house, can't you?
Not yet.
Not yet. So the answer would be maybe in the future you'll get table read-write access on the individual table. So this is where I'm struggling, right? Well, if I build a single lake house for bronze, silver, and gold all in the lake house, I think that's going to become a lot of tables and going to become very confusing. And what you'll do is you'll compensate with table naming schema to be able to sift through the tables to know, okay, I have a customer current bronze, customer current silver, customer current gold. Like the naming of these tables are going to get so intense that it's going to be like unwieldy to manage and or govern if you throw everything into a lake house. And this is where I think the analogy that Microsoft's putting together here falls apart, right? Yeah. I need multiple lake houses to segment what data people should have access to.
So you're saying, would you equate a lake house with each business unit then, or a particular data, like set of data sources? Because if we talk like what I'm trying to do is build the hierarchy, like how this would fall within an organization.
This is what I'm working through.
Especially if what this affords me, or what I should be doing as someone who's building data structures, is relying on the expertise of business units, right? This helps me have ownership be where it belongs, or at least have a SME, right, of the business unit engaged heavily in the ownership of data from a particular source. Well, how do we build that? Like, how does that ownership, is that part of something that goes into the full lake house and they own that work stream? Maybe, right? Maybe that's prior to like the constructed final forms of things, right? Actually, probably would. It wouldn't own the final. Well, maybe they would own both the input and the final result. But you'd have to segment out. Yeah, I don't know.
And I like that, but think about the road Microsoft brings you on when you build a lake house. Build a lake house, ingest in a pipeline or a data flow, push to a table. Now what? It's, here's the SQL endpoint. Here's your default data set for that lake house. This is where I really disagree or divert from, I think, that road, because I don't think it's one lake house, one data set in terms of like or full built data set. I see a lake, but
there's no reason why you couldn't I mean, I think.
But that's a lot of effort.
But
I mean, because how much are you refreshing then downstream? You have to
Well-
refresh all these data flows to get to this lake
Okay,
house.
I'm gonna
Then to get to
go
a single data set.
I'm gonna go on a tangent here, Tommy.
I'm still on one.
Well, can you take? So the question would be: is can you take a data set and mix different tables from different lake houses?
Not right now.
I
Say
think.
that again.
Okay, so imagine
Not
a
right
data.
now.
So imagine a data set, and you
Yeah.
load table.
That's such a good
But
question.
okay, but
that's
that's the problem. So this is what I'm
You
thinking
load
through.
what? Finish. I missed your point.
Sorry, I'm gonna go back.
such a good.
Tommy's freaking out right now. His mind just got blown. So we have these lake houses potentially, right? Multiple lake houses inside a Fabric workspace. So now we've added this whole context of a workspace, okay? Inside two lake houses, so maybe I have for whatever reason, I have an HR workspace and I have a sales workspace or sales lake house. Sorry, there's two different lake houses there. Does my data set, do I create a data set? Now, the default one is always linked to the origination or the origin of that lake house. So by default, you're going to get a data set that's always describing one entire lake house.
Yeah.
You can adjust that. What if I made my own data set and then I pluck from lake house number 1 and pluck some tables from lake house number 2? And so now I have a single data set that's using direct lake to both sources where I'm joining the data together. Yeah. I see no reason why this would not work, or no reason why technically this wouldn't.
You're saying shortcut to those sources?
Not even shortcut. I'm talking about the data set. Literally having a data set with two tables in it that you can then build relationships to in the data set. But now I'm pulling from two different lake houses.
With dependencies, and you lose direct lake. It becomes import at that point. It's simply a connection to a SQL endpoint. It's no longer a connection to a lake house. Once you go to that,
I don't want to get buried in the connection method here, but
I'm just saying this. To me, this seems like something in the realm of possibility. Like if the technology exists to have a direct lake connection to a single lake house, why would it be so hard for Microsoft to figure out how to pull another direct lake connection to a different lake house? It's going to get there.
We're not at that point yet, and I think like talking about the realm of a single lake house, because we're not there yet. To your scenario, Mike, is simply just connecting to the SQL warehouses endpoints, and it's basically a bunch of databases at that point. This does not really encompass. I love Seth's point too about the permissions, which is a whole other layer here.
Yes.
A whole other layer here on how much should be in a lake house.
Yes.
But thinking about how much, then what does a single lake house support?
I think a lake house will support. So I'm going to answer your question with another question and a statement.
Question, statement. Okay.
Maybe something like that. Maybe it's a question. I don't know. What I think needs to occur here is there needs to be a strategy around this. And so where I've been doing lake house development for the last 5 years or so. So I feel like I've got some strategies that seem to work well. And when you think about what other teams or other companies are doing in this lake house type architecture, let's not talk about the technology. I'm not talking about Fabric for a moment. They are building bronze, silver, and gold. Bronze is like that raw layer of data. You're streaming information in. You're getting a ever appending table of data. The silver layer is all this transforms. You're deleting any duplicates of records. You're simplifying the data. Maybe you're building a table that has historical records. Maybe you're building a table that only has the most recent value of a single record, right? Current and historical records. The engineering, the grunt of your engineering work is in the silver layer. At the end of this, you join tables together. You make materialized views. You build a final table that looks very close like a star schema. So I don't want to do engineering inside Power Query anymore because I have the power of the lakehouse. I want to build all the DIMs and facts as needed. And I literally, my Power Query steps inside Power Query should literally be 2 steps: source and change data types for Power BI. That's literally all that should be happening at the Power BI side for the data sets standpoint.
Yeah.
So being that's my architecture, I think depending on what kind of quality of data you care about, that's what should be in the lakehouse. So if you have Power BI reports pulling from the lakehouse, I think you should be thinking about the tables that live in that final lakehouse element. Again, whether you make this one big lakehouse and you just kind of name the tables a separate way, bronze, silver, gold tables, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. But regardless, at the end of the day, the data pipeline has to exist. And that final lakehouse becomes the dimensions and the facts that support the data set.
Well, the final objects you're creating become the artifacts that you share, regardless of whether that's through Power BI data sets or whatever.
Agree. Yeah,
you're-
it's the
the
shareable
way you're
artifacts.
describing it is
Yeah.
confusing because it's all part of the lake house,
Sure.
right? Like
Yes. Correct.
and maybe and this is like is this part of the conversation where we're rolling a lot of different layers of objects that we're creating into this conversation, whereas what's really relevant at the end of the day is the final product, right?
Yes.
And that is a set of data sources or data sets that make sense to the business and are usable. And that could mean when I say data sets, I don't mean models per se
Yes.
for
Yeah.
Power BI.
Correct.
What I mean
Could be
is
anything.
probably models, but could also be, views or compiled tables that provide, hard row level data that, business areas want to have access to that are consolidated from many different sources within a lakehouse. And I think that's the power of
That's a good point.
pulling all of this information together, is simplifying the access to and the ability for data people and teams to create queries or build data sets very easily. And that's the power of something like Power BI can do on a very front end level, but it's not enterprise, right?
Correct.
It's not repeatable,
Yes.
right? And I think that's the most fun part about
I like that definition.
this ecosystem here in how Power BI can be leveraged in an organization. Is it can be used as a discovery tool, whereby you are pulling together sources of data, you're doing discovery, you're figuring out how APIs work, you're connecting to all of these systems that organizations have, and you're learning what you would need to build the actual engineering pipelines. Because at the end of the day, the thing you probably built a sliver of for a report problem or an objective within the organization, and you give a very fast result to the business, which is valuable, you can then take those learnings and build in that to lakehouse processes, which are slower. They're going to be slower. But the next time the business comes around and says, okay, hey, we built this thing, now I want to see this, it's not a 3-week exercise.
Yeah.
It's a 2-day exercise, right?
And
And you can give them the data in many different forms. Or if they said, hey, we did this thing, what I'd love to see is how we would connect that with this and this and this. And if you have these processes in place and you've consolidated your data in a lakehouse, you can be like, okay, give me 10 minutes and I'll join that. I'll do that query for you.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
That's the value of why we compile all this stuff together.
And Seth, this is where I'm leaning, or maybe it would be a better way to say this is where I want to lean, where there's almost there's a framework of department level lake houses, which could support the data science, can support creating views from the warehouse that's created, and it supports all the tables for a single department. At the kind of the end result or the final lake house. To me, that makes the most sense. It could support multiple data sets with multiple different schemas and relationships from a modeling point of view. It can support any of the data science there because it's already curated and created. And it can support the views, to your point, from the warehouse, where I don't have to create these multiple lake houses per like 1 or 2 data sets.
Yeah, I guess the question I would have is how you delineate building those objects, I guess, matters less to me than the framework that we have within Fabric that allows us to interact with the objects that we need to when we need to.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
because if you're a business unit and you're going to go build your own lake house, I don't care.
What
I would care is if I
use the custom dimension that I made.
If I wanted to access your data and pull it into information I have, I don't care how you built it. If you want to own the object and you did that in a different lake house, I don't think that matters in this ecosystem. I could make an argument that, well, that doesn't equate to its own lake house. I just give you a schema within mine, right? Like,
but there are some things, Tommy, that
there.
And Tommy, I think you're making a good point here around, like, we could talk about like a department level goals, and they have their ways of shaping data for their department and what they need. But there also are, I mean, when you guys were talking, I'm writing down things. I think Fabric is the repeatable data engineering for the enterprise. That is what it is. Across all business users and IT. It serves all purposes. But one area that I'm struggling with here a little bit, Tommy, that I'm challenged by when statement you said was, I feel like the idea or the concept of a single department building their own lake house, I think I'm very much into that. I think it makes sense. But I do think we need to step back as the company looks at the data they have for their entire company and say, there's artifacts, dimensions for customers, dimensions for products. There are things that are cross company. Every department should be looking at the same stuff. And to me, this is where in the same way we have potential data sets in a separate deployment pipeline of dev test prod data sets to a workspace that is dev test prod of reports, right? The same respect of having that delineation between the data sets and the reports. All that Fabric does for me is adds another ability or another layer of control, another layer of lake houses, and where we could say, as a company, holistically, here is DIM customer. Okay, department, build your own lake house. But here's a shortcut to these other tables that are groomed holistically from the entire company. And there's a team, and this is where maybe the central BI team or representatives from different groups say, who owns the data that's going to be in this DIM customer table? Does that all come out of Salesforce? Are we making up our own thing? Are we trying to load stuff from crappy Excel? Like, what's going to give here? And we figure out, this gives us the opportunity to really step back and say, what is the data that drives our company? And I think on the projects I've been on recently, there's a lot of value, if we're talking like, the commercial team, the operation team, the revenue, the finance team, like those teams have a lot of the same data sources. And when you talk across all of them and have a more holistic view of your company, yes, you may go ahead and build your own lake house for what you need, but there is parts of this that should be pulled from a central place.
Yeah.
And so to me, I'm so excited for where Fabric is going. It's still rough around the edges. I'm still not recommending anyone go use it today, day one. It still needs some refinement. And I don't think anyone should use it until you start talking about more like one security that's on top of all this, right?
Yeah.
Once that gets there, I think I'll feel much more comfortable about permissioning, because as of right now, you can only permission access to or not to an entire lake house in itself.
And I think this is why I said this is where I want to lean. To your point, that's absolutely having those master tables, which are essential, right? To have
essential, gotta have them.
Even dim date, for crying out loud. Having that somewhere in a central master lake house, your sister bay of lake houses, so to speak.
Yep.
Wisconsin reference there for some of you, but I'm agreeing with you where I want to lean that way, but I also think the architecture or the technology or even the UI can really support that right now.
I agree. It's not there yet. That's what I say. Right. It's in preview. It's kind of still getting things figured out. I think from what I see, if I can read the tea leaves in the tea here a little bit, where Microsoft's, it feels like they've got the right design and vision for where this is going. And I saw a tweet from Amir, who's kind of leading the helm here. He said, another massive update for, I think it was August, another massive update for August. Get ready. There's going to be tons more massive updates for now until forever on top of this, this Fabric thing. So I really do think Microsoft is very much pushing this one. And you'll notice, actually, Donald just put a note out here. SQL Bits 2024 just got announced. So we'll throw a quick, you heard it here first, people. SQL Bits 2024 is out the 19th to the 23rd of March in Farnborough. I don't know
Farnborough.
You're so good at Farnborough.
Farnborough.
This SQL
this is people from across the pond there are going to be like, yeah,
what is that? Google it immediately. Googling
Wisconsin. We're slaughtering in it. Farnborough.
So, but there's also with that conference, there's also another one that Microsoft's putting on in December. There's an announcement from the December conference for data and AI. So really? I mean, when you look at the speakers, it's all about Fabric, and it's all speakers are on the Fabric page. So Microsoft is super doubling down on you have your operational system, and then now you have Fabric. So literally, that's the only solution you're going to need for anything in your company will be go build your dynamic side, the enterprise side.
It is a very compelling story.
It's getting better.
And if all these pieces start pulling together, right, it makes sense in many, many ways.
Mm-hmm. So
To be a big
love it.
impact in the business in the same
Totally
way
agree.
that Power BI was, right?
Yes.
I think this opens doors, and we talked about this, I think, in the last podcast, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
there's a definite possibility, even with all the AI introductions, and you throw that into the conversation, right?
Exactly
Every
right.
element of this simplified ways for more and more people to get access to these systems and be a part and a player. You're bringing very complex technologies and systems, and you're lowering the bar of entry.
Yes.
Which opens the doors for a lot more ownership to subject matter experts within businesses. It's a big deal.
So to answer this question kind of in one statement here at the end, I'll give my view on this one, right? How much data do you load to OneLake? Everything. Everything gets landed into OneLake. My caveat to this is you need a plan to figure out on how you're going to bring everything in and what is the method by which you're going to find data stewards for that information, and how will you find a proper method to communicate and distribute that content back out. So to your point, Tommy, right? Our lake house is the skyscraper with many rooms with lots of data filling all those rooms. It's gonna have everything in it. Great. If I have the right level of permissions, I can go to any room in that building and look at any data anywhere in our organization. That's exactly what we want. In addition to this, it lowers the barrier of we're not having to worry about building the building or building the infrastructure. All that's being managed now by Microsoft. And we now have tools at our disposal that are all software as a service. This is the way the market is going. And I find the speed of innovation has very much increased when you start using tools like this. The challenge that I think we're going to face is we need to have a plan on what information, in the same way we're going to have report proliferation, because it's Javan's paradox for data now. So we just talked about Javan's paradox around the report building experience and the BI that goes along that. This is the same effect that's going to be happening with creating tables of lakehouse data. The organization will be able to, at a much lower cost, time, effort, build a ton of more tables inside the lakehouse. How do we find which are the best pieces and sources of data, and how do we elevate certain portions of that data above others so that it becomes certified and regularly reused? That's going to be the challenge. The technology has gotten better. We need better policies, and we need to educate our people to make sure that we can keep up with it. We're not going to be able to keep up if we don't educate. That's kind of my point. Seth, any final thoughts? That's my final 9 points.
I think I liked your final 9 points.
There we go.
I think I agree with you. A lot of the foundational things that we've been doing still apply. It is
does not change.
What's changing that is how we bring those to light, or you make the best use of them within the organization. And there's the people aspect of this. We can bring in more people in frameworks like this to take ownership of data, and that changes how we go do things or build things within the organization. So
exactly
how we architect the certified data objects and reports can change completely and be much more efficient. And that's what I'm pretty excited about.
Tommy, anything?
Yeah, I think the last thing I really foresee where we're going with this, with the user enablement and empowerment, we're getting less to, I don't want to say there's going to be different words than just data engineering in what Fabric's really going to open up for the business.
Oh boy.
Community. Yeah.
Oh boy.
So we're really opening up something that I still don't think we see the potential here. I still don't think we see what the final kind of impact this is going to have on businesses, both from your BI, all to your point, Seth, all the way down the business, to what impact this is going to have. And I think good, we're planning it, but continue, I think, the knowledge and also an understanding what can it hold, and talking about what is the final output, what is that final outcome we're looking here.
I would totally agree with these things. With that, thank you very much for listening and hanging out here for the podcast. Thanks for letting me argue this thing out with Seth and share some of our ideas here. This is healthy for me. It helps me really refine these ideas and what we're thinking through here. I hope you are also exploring, what does this Fabric thing mean for you? I think regardless, at the end of the day, this is going to change how you build and work with your data. It will be fundamentally different after you start really using Fabric and start getting engaged with it. And I'm very excited for it. Let me be clear. I'm very pro Fabric. I think this is the way that Microsoft needs to go to remain competitive. I'm just trying to make sure I understand where's the best place to spend my effort. What should I learn, and how do we govern it? Thank you for watching. We appreciate your listenership. Please like and subscribe if you don't mind. We would love it if you just share this with somebody else. This is, we think, really good content. If you liked it and you hung out for the whole episode, I think some of you have, please share somewhere else. Let somebody else know that you enjoyed the content as well. And maybe you didn't learn anything, but maybe you got a couple kicks out of Mike being frustrated with the lake house. With that, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple and Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to subscribe, leave a rating. Helps us out a ton. If you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode, head over to Power BI Tips/podcast. And finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 Central, and join the conversation on all of Power BI Tips social media channels.
Awesome. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.